Success in business and life does not always come down to skill, talent, experience, or how many resources you have at your disposal. In fact, contrary to popular belief, it doesn't come down to your skin color or your gender. Sorry to break that news to you. What it does come down to is the development of a very important skill, a skill that every entrepreneur and leader must have in order to create success for themselves and for others. As a naval aviator, we were required to be able to adapt, improvise, and overcome, no matter what the situation threw at us. And if you're building a business right now or leading people, you know that it's a very dynamic environment that does not have rules. In fact, sometimes it feels like the rules are built against you. You have to be willing to think outside the box, think on your feet, and become resourceful. The number one skill of every entrepreneur and leader is to become resourceful, and that is exactly what I'm going to teach you about here in this episode of the True Driven Podcast. What's up, my friends? JT DeBolt with you today for the True Driven Podcast, the podcast for the few, the true, the driven, those of us who have aligned and united to become the True Driven. And I say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whatever time it is for you, no matter where you might be tuning in from on the Big Blue Marble. Thank you as always for joining me here on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course, YouTube. YouTube.com/JT DeBolt, your home for all things True Driven. That's where I can bring you the most updated content on a weekly basis. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and be the first to know when I bring you new content each and every single week. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to make do with what you had? Maybe it was a situation that went completely unplanned, or maybe it was something you planned and it went off script and you found yourself having to think on your feet. You had to find yourself thinking outside the box, coming up with a solution given the situation that seemed to have been working against you. Maybe you've been out camping in the woods and you forgot something key and essential. Maybe you forgot your tent. Maybe you forgot the fire starter. Maybe you forgot something altogether and you know that you can't just drive all the way back home. You had to make do with what you had. It's almost like you had to be like MacGyver. Remember that old school TV show? And I'm not talking about the new one. I'm talking about the old one from the 80s with Richard Dean Anderson as the key role there of MacGyver. It seemed like MacGyver could come up with any kind of a solution just using a toothpick, a paper clip, and a stick of gum. He could do almost anything. Save the world even. Defuse a nuclear bomb. It didn't matter what the circumstance was, MacGyver had a solution. Well, as entrepreneurs, and especially leaders, you know that very rarely does the situation go as planned. It doesn't mean that you don't come up with a plan. It doesn't mean that you're not prepared. It's just that a lot of times half the battle comes from using what's up between your left and right eardrum in a tight situation. When chaos hits, you're the one that's calm, cool, and collected. As a naval aviator, they used to require upon us that we had the ability to think on our feet. In fact, I remember as a young guy coming up through the ranks asking my division officer, what does it take to become a Navy pilot just like you? And he said, frankly, the ability to think on your feet. I thought it was going to be something like the ability to identify enemy aircraft or to be able to pull G's or be able to navigate, aviate, and communicate and do all the stuff that's required to be a pilot. And he said, really, the number one thing is the ability to think on your feet. Now, I've been an entrepreneur going on 17 years at the time of the recording of this podcast, and I can tell you that it's probably the single most important skill that I've ever had was the ability to be resourceful. If people ask me, hey, what do you think it takes to be successful as a business owner? What do you think it takes to be successful as a leader, even if you don't own the business and you're helping build and grow that business? My answer would be universally the same, and that is the skill of resourcefulness. So what is resourcefulness and how come it's so important? Well, the way I like to think of resourcefulness is that ability to think on your feet, the ability to think outside the box, the ability to quite literally build the aircraft in the air. That thoughtful approach to problem solving, the ability to compartmentalize emotion, the ability to be able to find the solution while everybody else is panicking, freaking out, and be able to calmly deliver that in an articulate way, that is resourcefulness. The ability to use what you have, whether that be a limited amount of resources or an abundant amount of resources, the ability to find the solution in the face of the chaos, the confusion, and the lack of clarity. But this sounds great, and it sounds like a superpower that only the very few elite people in the world have. And the truth is that we all have it. We all have the capability to be resourceful. As kids, especially, those of us that grew up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we mostly spent our time outside playing and using our intellect, using our imaginations to entertain ourselves. And so back then, there was this ability to kind of think broadly, think big picture, and be able to do things that weren't necessarily created for us or delivered right to us at the flick of a switch or the press of a button like we have today. You didn't have Grubhub and all these things that could deliver you food. You had to make your own food or you had to go find it. And what's interesting about this is that nowadays we have so much technology. We have so many conveniences that are available to us right at our fingertips. And that sounds amazing on paper. But the reality is that if we're not careful, those conveniences can quickly erode one of the most important skills that we need every single day as leaders. Now, let me be clear. It doesn't matter whether you own the company or you're running the company. It doesn't matter whether you're leading a small team or a large team. It doesn't matter if you're leading a country. It doesn't matter what your level of leadership is. Each and every single one of us needs to have the skill of resourcefulness, because that skill is the kind of thing that can serve you and the people that you're there for, whether it's your family or an entire team or an entire country. You have to have the skill of resourcefulness, the ability to tap into the resources you have. Now, you might have an abundance of resources. You might be one of those fortunate few who have an unlimited bank account and a staff of thousands at your resource that you can tap into, and you can seek out their knowledge, you can seek out their wisdom, you can seek out their counsel. That still in and of itself requires resourcefulness, because it requires you to be able to shut the ego off and say, hey, I need help, I need guidance, and I don't have all the answers. Can you help me? One of the most important questions I ever heard from a leader was, what is it that I'm pretending not to see? If you can ask yourself a question like that, you've immediately catapulted yourself into a type of the brain or a type of thinking called curiosity. Curiosity naturally requires you to be open-minded, meaning I don't have all the answers, even though I feel pretty comfortable and pretty confident that I do. Let me see if there's another angle that I might be missing. That right there is a very resourceful behavior. So right off the bat, if you want to be a more resourceful leader, first and foremost, the thing is you have to learn to adopt the idea that you don't have all the answers. Now, I know you true drivens get this. This is inherently obvious. In fact, you've heard me talk a lot about the fine art and science of resourcefulness, because it is one of the core principles, the 6 core principles of the true driven. So you guys know this, but let me just kind of talk about this broadly when we talk about resourcefulness. Resourcefulness is that ability to be able to find the solution even in the face of what seems like insurmountable odds. Most of society today operates from a place of feeling like the world is against them, right? You'll see this a lot with this kind of victimhood or this entitlement behavior where we want other people and other things to work for us. We expect the government to feed us. We expect somebody to be there to rescue us. And there's a great saying by somebody who I admire, Greg Anderson, nobody is coming to save you. Now, I know that sounds harsh, and it might sound a little bit like we're starting to tilt the conversation in a different direction, but I want to be clear. The thing I love about that is that it requires us to go to that core of personal leadership, where we accept 100% ownership for our lot in life, as well as the course that we take. You'll hear me say, no matter what course you fly in life, fly high, fly fast, fly far, you get to choose that. You get to choose how high you fly, how fast you go, and how far you go in business and in life. And that in and of itself, that saying, that phrase is at its core the element of really that true essence of personal leadership and personal excellence. So what does it mean? How do we actually become resourceful? Let's get back on track for a second, because resourcefulness, while important, is also something that requires a little bit of, kind of thinking about how to actually make this happen. I like to give you guys somewhat of a formulaic approach to it, even though resourcefulness in and of itself is kind of a habit. It's something that you can kind of create and mold for yourself, meaning you don't have to have a specific recipe for it. There isn't really a guidebook or a playbook for how to create resourcefulness, but I'd like to offer you a couple of ways that you can start creating resourcefulness in your business and life right now. Case in point, and I will share this with you before, when resourcefulness is necessary, you usually find it under duress. It's very rare that you're just sitting back and everything's going great and you're saying to yourself, man, isn't life awesome? I got all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed. This is good to go. Usually resourcefulness is required when the shit hits the fan. So as leaders, you have to have this skill in place. The other cool part about this skill, very much like what I talked about with discipline in a previous episode of the podcast, is it is a transferable, demonstrative type of thing. You can demonstrate this to somebody. You can actually transfer the skill just like you can with discipline. You can transfer the skill of resourcefulness to other people. So for those of you who are leading people, you've got teams that you're building or teams that you're refining, and you're developing those leaders inside your teams, inside your organization. You're going to want to listen up, because discipline is one thing, resourcefulness is another thing. And the great thing is those two are very highly connected. They're connected very intimately. If you've got a very disciplined person who lacks resourcefulness, they actually will learn resourcefulness much faster because they have that natural desire to want to find the solutions for themselves. You want to celebrate that, highlight it, and also strengthen that tendency in that person. If you yourself are saying, hey, listen, I know that I need to work on my resourcefulness, then you're in the right place. So I want to kind of talk you guys through a little bit about this today. We're going to talk about getting resourceful. Now, the first part that I like to talk about when it comes to resourcefulness is this concept of getting clear on the objective. Always starting out with kind of a sense of what it is you want to achieve. Now, this could be small, big, it could be medium, it could be large. It doesn't really matter. The point is that if you've got a mission that you're working on inside your organization or a mission that you're working on personally, we got to stop and ask ourselves, what is the objective? Probably one of the most important questions you can ask, especially when the shit does actually hit the fan, the wheels fall off, and you find yourself right in the middle of the plan, and the plan seems to have vaporized because of a shift in whatever the situation might be. This happens a lot. It happened a lot to me in Iraq, where we were rebuilding the oil infrastructure for that company, or for that country rather. Something would come up. Invariably, everything would be working wonderfully, and then out of nowhere, something would collapse on us, either literally or metaphorically speaking. As an aviator, I can't tell you how many times the flight plan that we put in needed to change. Sometimes you'd put in a flight plan saying, hey, we're going to fly from point A to point B, and somehow, without warning, a thunderstorm would roll in, either right before or after takeoff. Well, now all of a sudden, you've got to have a kind of a go, no-go criteria in order to make really great, solid decisions that are both safe, but also help you effectively accomplish the mission. You got to be clear on what the actual objective is. So that's really step number one, as far as I'm concerned, for all leaders. Like, if we're going to accomplish our missions in business and life, we got to start with a clear sense of what that objective is. What is the desired outcome? The desired outcome. The other part about this is you got to ask yourself, what's the big challenge here? Because if something came up in the middle of you making the plan itself, launching the plan, and then executing on it before accomplishing the mission, something got in the way that is necessitating the need for you to actually be resourceful, we got to get clear on what that barrier is. What is that thing that got in the way that's trying to prevent us from accomplishing the mission? Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a situation, maybe it's just something completely outside of our control. Usually it is. Usually what you'll find is it's something that you didn't see, couldn't have foreseen, but it popped up, right? It's just kind of one of those things. And a lot of times people who operate from a victim mentality will say, oh, life happened. Life got in the way. While leaders and high-performing entrepreneurs know that that's not an acceptable excuse. I mean, it might be an excuse. You might say it, you might utter it, but to live in that excuse is completely unacceptable. In order to overcome any kind of a barrier, we have to be able to know two things. What is the objective, meaning what's the desired outcome? And two, what's the challenge that's holding us back from accomplishing that? It's kind of important because if you're not seeing that from the big picture, all of a sudden the emotions, the shock and awe of the situation start to overtake us. You start feeling overwhelmed. You're like, fuck, dude, I thought this was going to work out on the first go. And while it's important to have high expectations, while it's important to have, like kind of a positive mind frame around what you're doing, there is an element where you have to be able to kind of think to yourself, hey, look, man, something could potentially get in the way of this. So let's plan the contingencies. Case in point, great example of this is every single flight we ever flew, especially our combat missions, we always had a weather brief, which was given to us by a meteorologist. They would actually talk to us about the weather, both for takeoff and for landing at our home field, if we were landing back at the home field, or at our destination, if we were landing somewhere else. Talk about weather in flight or en route to wherever the thing was, the weather over the target, if there was one. You get the idea. The whole point is we actually briefed just the weather. Then we briefed the actual mission itself, takeoff time, takeoff altitude, or, cruise altitude, descent altitude, all the different things. We talked about the location of the target. We talked about the target itself, the target package. We talked about all the different things, as well as the aircraft brief. So we'd actually go into and talk to maintenance control, which is the name of the organization that actually worked on the aircraft, and get a look at the health of the aircraft, like what's the maintenance status of the airplane. That's a lot of different information, a lot of separate briefs being given by specific specialists inside the squadron. And as you can see, this was a team effort to accomplish the mission. So this was an act of being resourceful. We were seeking out the resource of information and wisdom from people outside of ourselves. So even as a pilot, you might think, wow, man, Navy pilots, they must be like the superheroes or whatever, right? That can just do everything. And the answer is that's actually not true. No matter what Hollywood will have you believe, it's a huge team effort just to get the aircraft off the ground. But the other brief that we got before we took off was the intel brief. So the intelligence department, the intelligence officer would come in and give us a brief on what to expect for this particular mission, especially with a combat mission, extremely important because you had to have all the information you could before you took off. A key and essential part of that intel brief was, what do we do if everything goes wrong? What happens if you get shot down, for instance? There was an actual brief, a contingency plan in place so that if something went wrong, whether the aircraft crashed due to a maintenance malfunction or we got shot down or whatever, if we survive that, what are we going to do next in order to prevent being captured or to escape in case we do? We actually brief that each and every single mission. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that have listened to the woo-woos that say, well, listen, if I focus on the negative, isn't the negative going to come to me? Am I going to attract it to me? And the answer is, fuck no, you're not going to. The answer is, you have to be thinking about potential outcomes that are less than desirable. As a leader, and especially you entrepreneurs out there know this, very rarely do things go the way you had them originally planned. Like before you started your business, did everything go the way you thought it was going to go? Or since launching your business, have you noticed that basically every day is a bare knuckle fist fight? You're fighting against yourself. You're fighting against that or this or whatever, your competitors, the marketplace, you name it. There's always something that's coming up. That's what I'm talking about. The ability to look objectively, pull the emotions aside, and start looking at the big picture of what to potentially have to do to pivot in the event that something doesn't go the way we want it to. That's called having a contingency plan. So contingency planning is kind of part of knowing that clear objective. The clear objective is what the fuck we actually want to have as our perfect outcome, but also taking a look at the potential things that could get in the way of our success. Those barriers to our success, those things that stand up and serve as a challenge for us to have to overcome. Just by doing that one thing, just by thinking in that way, you have started to become resourceful. You've actually opened up that part of your brain, that creative side of your brain that says, look, let's create solutions to challenges even before they've come to bear. Now, is it possible that doing all this work will end up being kind of fruitless, meaning you may launch the thing and go on the mission and it goes completely as planned? The answer is yes, actually, totally possible. Does that mean that that work was completely useless? Not at all. In fact, I'm happy to report that every mission I ever flew, especially the combat missions, went pretty much more or less as planned, meaning we didn't get shot down. We didn't have to worry about all of that contingency planning. But the fact that we talked through it, the fact that we talked through the emergency procedures, the fact that we talked through any of the search and reconnaissance and having the guys come and get us out if we did get shot down, gave us the freedom to think through the actual execution of the mission. We knew that we had already kind of problem solved it before the problem arose. We had identified the challenge, come up with a plan before taking off so that we weren't thinking with our feet on fire, quite literally. We were already kind of ahead of the game. So that's one of the most important things. If you kind of bring this down to earth now as an entrepreneur, very rarely are you going to be in a situation where your ass is actually on the line and lives are on the line. Very rarely. Well, I'm sure there's an exception out there. And for those of you that are in that line of work, hats off to you, major hand salute to you. But for the most part, most entrepreneurs are not dealing with life and death situations. It might feel like that because you might feel like, dude, I got the whole world, the weight of the world on my shoulders. I need to make this fucking thing work. I get that. I 100% understand that and respect that, which is even more so the case that this very first step, if you want to develop better resourcefulness inside yourself, your teams, and the people you lead, number one is you got to get super clear on what the objective is. Keeping the big picture, or another way of seeing it is keeping the main thing the main thing. If you build the plan around that and then also start talking about the possible contingencies, well, now you're already opening your mind to that creative kind of problem solving and thought process that allows you to be much more resourceful. Now, the next part about this is you want to start training yourself to be solution oriented. What do I mean by that? I kind of alluded to this a moment ago. It's one of the frustrating elements of today's society. Most people are in a situation where ultimately when things go wrong, they get frustrated. They go into victim mode. Why me, right? Whereas solution-oriented people are like, fuck yeah, dude, challenge notified. I'm aware that it's there. Let's go get some. Most entrepreneurs, you guys out there that are building your businesses, you're already thinking solution-oriented because that's quite frankly one of the most definitive pieces or characteristics of being an entrepreneur, right? Your daily activity is creating solutions to problems. That's half the battle of being an entrepreneur in the first place. It kind of defines being in business. People have a need, they have a gap, they have a blind spot. You provide a solution. There you go. So right off the bat, it's important as an entrepreneur to recognize that not only is it important and it's a key characteristic of being an entrepreneur, but you're kind of already doing it. Now, if you're not an entrepreneur, if you're a leader inside of an organization, for instance, you may say, hey, listen, I'm not an entrepreneur. I show up every single day and I work for somebody else. You still have to have a very solution-oriented behavior, that posture showing up every single day, almost looking forward to something going wrong. Let me be clear. We're not trying to sabotage our own success here. We're not trying to sabotage ourselves. We're not trying to create problems so that we can be the hero. That's not what I mean. What I mean is waking up with that understanding, that confidence in ourselves that things probably will go off the rails. And when they do, we're the ones that can be counted on. We were uniquely called and put into this position of leadership, and we are fucking happy and excited to have that opportunity to meet that challenge head on. That is being solution oriented. Now, one thing that I would encourage you to do is have a question in your mind, and the question is, how might I create a win today? How might I create a win? When you have the attitude and you have that question kind of milling in your head, how might I create a win today? Or how might we create a win? What you're doing is basically looking for opportunities to overcome challenges or overcome something that could potentially be a problem. Most of society sees the world as a problem. Leaders see the world as a challenge, meaning an opportunity to rise up to that thing and create the solution. So being solution oriented means instead of being averse to problems or even averse to failure, we're kind of looking at it as an opportunity to strap the gloves on and go a couple of rounds with a heavyweight, opponent, which is this whole concept of, whatever is coming at us that's preventing us from accomplishing the mission at hand. So being solution oriented is really a thought behavior. It's a thought process. Quite frankly, it's an attitude, if you want to think of it that way. If you start seeing yourself as a solution provider, somebody who can be counted upon, then you've already got half the battle won. And I think that's one of the most important takeaways. Something that I learned in the cockpit as a naval aviator is people are fucking counting on us. Like, who else is going to do this job? Who else is going to be called for this? It may as well be us. And isn't that awesome? Don't we feel honored to be in this position? As terrifying as it might be, as challenging as it might be, as insurmountable at times as it felt like it was, here we were. There we were sitting in that seat, called upon by our country to fulfill this mission. That was pretty fucking badass. And as an entrepreneur, you can take the same thing on. In fact, I will just be straight up. It sounds almost hyperbolic to say it now as a Navy pilot because it only happened really a handful of times over the course of a 12-year career. But as an entrepreneur, it's pretty much a daily thing. Being solution-oriented is kind of a prerequisite to sitting in the seat every single day, building your business, leading your teams, leading your organization. As a leader, having that attitude and that posture of being solution-oriented as opposed to being consumed and overwhelmed by the problems, when you flip that switch and see yourself as a solution provider and think about how to become solution-oriented, it changes everything. One little caveat to this, just a little pro tip, if you will, is if you ever do find yourself struggling to become solution-oriented, where you're like, man, I can't see the forest for the trees. All I seem to see are the barriers to success. All I seem to see are the problems. My suggestion is to literally physically get up out of your seat, walk outside for about 5 minutes, breathe some fresh air, let your mind escape the problem for just a moment. I'm going to suppose that there's nothing in your life right now, unless it's a dire emergency, like somebody's bleeding out or having an actual heart attack, where you're applying CPR to them in the moment, that you can't step away for a 5-minute pause to just let your mind relax and potentially let the solution come to you. Even if the solution doesn't come to you, to get into the practice of being mindful, having mindfulness and being mindful of the situation, being present in the moment, and allowing yourself to kind of let the emotion simmer out, it will help you become much more solution-oriented. Because as opposed to focusing on the pain, focusing on the problem, focusing on all the stuff that's working against you, you're giving your brain a break, a mini vacation, if you will, just long enough to get your physiology squared away, get yourself back into control, personal control. One of the most powerful things you can do is the control over yourself. We spend so much time trying to control other people or control the situation. Instead of fucking worrying about that stuff, let's worry about ourselves. Let's get ourselves under control, get your breathing under control, get your physiology under control, and then you can start worrying about the situation and others. Now, the next part to this, I've already kind of alluded to this. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you do not feel resourceful, or you're like, I don't know, man, I don't know what the answer is. I've looked everywhere. You feel like you're at the end of your rope. I'm challenging you to take one last stab at getting yourself more curious. That's not to say you haven't been curious to this point, but the question is, how can you take your curiosity to one more step, one more level higher? Now, I'm going to challenge you with this. Throw it in the comments. How do you get yourself into a curious state? How do you elevate your curiosity in any given moment, any given day? Doesn't matter what the situation might be. How do you do it? I'll give you my answer. You true drivens already know what I'm going to say. And that is this: ask questions. Because if you're actually asking a question, not a leading question, but a question that requires kind of open-mindedness or open answers, then what happens is you can't help but actually let go of some of the certainty of feeling like you got to be right, or that you already are right. I'm right. I know everything. Well, obviously you don't. Well, I've tried everything. Obviously you haven't, because there's always a solution. So one question that I encourage you to ask, and it's really a two-part question, but it's the same question, is what if? So if you're ever in a situation where you feel like you're at your fucking wit's end, you're like, dude, I've tried literally everything. I'm tapped out. The gas tank is fucking empty. What the fuck? That's a great question. What the fuck? But you're kind of in a state where you're not very resourceful. A great way to get resourceful real fast is to get back into curiosity and ask the question, what if? Now, I would actually encourage you just to do it. Just to sit there quietly and go, what if? And see what happens. See what comes up for you. But there's another way to ask this question two different ways. What if it works? So I'm tapped out. I've got no answers. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. What if I just sat down and said, what if this thing works? What if this mission works out? Instantly, my mind starts to track and trend toward a more solution-based mind frame. All of a sudden, I'm like, well, what would need to happen for that to happen? What if it worked out? That would mean that, the sale went through, the client showed up for the actual call, whatever the thing might be. So what might I need to do about that? All of a sudden, you started to go into a much more curious mind frame, a much more curious, energetic state. Instead of being stuck and locked into the concept like this ain't going to work, the question is, well, what if it does work? On the flip side, maybe you're high on life. Maybe you're thinking, dude, I'm so pumped. I'm so excited about this. Let's go. Be careful, because that's an awesome place to be. You're in a much more energetic, much more self-empowered place to be. And I got to be honest, couldn't be a better place to execute from. But before you do, ask the question, what if this doesn't work out? Not only what if it works out, but what if it doesn't? What are we going to do? What if this initial call doesn't work out? What if they don't show up? What if they say no? What if the person that we were set to hire doesn't work out? What if we thought this was going to be the best fit? We hired the right person to become the CEO. We hired the right person to be the CFO, or whatever the situation is. What if they don't work out? What's our pivot? When you do that, you're actually coming from a place where you are much more resourceful and much more empowered to take on whatever might happen next. And the cool part about being in that state, being in that curious state, or that state of curiosity, is it actually expands your ability to think in terms of resources that maybe you haven't tapped yet. Either financial resources, physical resources, or more importantly, the single most important resource you have, human resources. And so this idea of getting really curious allows you to expand your mind. If you are fortunate enough to have a team, if you are fortunate enough to be leading people, you have subordinates that actually answer to you and count on you for their paycheck, and for you to guide and direct this company or this organization or whatever it is you're building, your business, I would highly recommend having regular, weekly, if not daily meetings with them to tap their knowledge, to tap their wisdom, to tap their experience, because they will always see things from a perspective that you will not. One of the greatest, most wealthy experiences that I have, probably the single most valuable resource that I have, is my team. The people that I have the privilege to work with. I hired them. I've trained them. By all measure of accountability, I have more experience than they do. I have more success, if you want to call it that, I guess. Whatever that word means. But I would be nothing, zero, without my team. Full stop. I'm not afraid to say that out loud. In fact, I'm very proud of that. It means that I've done a good enough job of attracting the right kind of people, articulating the vision, having them buy into it, and stick around long enough to become a part of that movement, to be a part of that mission, to be a part of that vision. That's your role as a leader. Doesn't matter whether you're building a business for yourself or you are somebody who is working for somebody else who is doing that. If you are in the act of being an entrepreneur or being a leader, resourcefulness, the single most important skill, comes right down to curiosity. and that ability to foster curiosity, not just with your team, but most importantly, with yourself. Because if you get closed off, if you get certain, that's the example you're setting. That's the example you're leading with. Be very careful with that. The final part, one of my favorite parts about resourcefulness, because honestly, probably the thing that sharpens the blade of resourcefulness sharper than even curiosity, is risk taking. The ability to take a very reasonable risk, a calculated risk, not something that's just sort of, whimsical, but something where you thought through it, you planned for it, and you executed on it with a sense of confidence, a sense of clarity, but also coming from a place of saying, even if it doesn't work out on the first go, we have not lost the game. We have not lost the mission. We will be resourceful. We will pivot, adapt, improvise, and overcome, as they used to say to us in the military. The ability to adapt, improvise, and overcome meant we're going to take the risk and we'll see how it goes. You might think, oh, it sounds like you're flying by the seat of your pants. And truthfully, yeah, kind of. I mean, think about this. Do you know for a fact, do you know for 100% certain that what you're doing right now is going to work out? I doubt it very much. Throw it in the comment. I'm challenging you guys to tell me that, yeah, that's 100% true. I'm 100% clear this is going to work out. If that's the case, I would love to interview you because I want to know how you got there. But most people are probably operating from less than 100%. Now, you may have a high degree of clarity that it's going to work out, and that's great. That's expected, right? But even if it's a low degree, you got to think, if it's not 100%, it's kind of a risk, right? So the lower the degree of certainty, the higher the risk. So life is a risk. You drive down the road every day. You don't know for certain that you're coming back. Think about that. You're driving a 2 or 3,000 ton death machine, 2 or 3,000 pound death machine down the road in the opposite direction without necessarily anything in between you and them is another car driven by a person you don't even fucking know. Like they could be crazy. They could be drunk. They could be something other than, perfectly locked in and focused. Most people probably aren't very focused anymore because of those fucking smartphone in their hand, driving down the road. And yet you trust that more than you trust your own ability to take a risk. That makes no sense. And as a leader, we have to be willing to take risks. And taking a risk in and of itself is an act of resourcefulness. It's basically saying, look, man, I'm going to take a leap of faith on this, knowing that whatever doesn't work out, I will figure out on the way down before I crash into the ground. I may have to build the wings wider. I may have to flap those wings harder. But either way, I will find a way to win. I will find a way to make this work. That's a big fucking risk that you take, but that is an act of being resourceful. So really, to get back to this, it's a pretty simple process. And it's not even a process, meaning it's not a checklist. You don't go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. That's not what I'm implying here. What I'm saying is it really does start, though, with getting clear on the objective. You got to know what the desired outcome is and what the potential challenges or barriers are to that outcome. Step 2 is making sure that you are developing a solution-oriented behavior and belief system, meaning you're constantly looking for the challenges, not because you want to find out what's wrong or what could possibly, shoot you out of the sky, but rather that earnest, eager, enthusiastic approach to finding the challenge so that you can come up with a solution. Next is, of course, it's all about being curious, right? This is basically the whole thing, is we want to develop a true sense of curiosity, operating from life from a place of curiosity, like childlike curiosity. Do you remember when you were a kid, how life seemed everything seemed possible? It seemed like limitless possibilities when you were a kid. You could be anything, you could go anywhere, do anything you wanted as a kid. Well, we lose that as adults because we're so rooted in certainty. We want to be right. We want to be able to say that we called it. We want to be able to say we knew better. As opposed to saying, I don't fucking know. What if? What if it works? What if it doesn't? What might I need to do to make it work? What might I need to do if it doesn't work? That level of curiosity gives us the strength, the power, the courage, and the clarity to take the risks that are necessary. Because everything worth having, everything worth achieving comes at a risk. It comes at the potential that it may not work out. Remember, you may not win. Not every risk is going to pay off. But if you don't win, if you lose, it doesn't make you a loser. It makes you a contender. You took the risk. So not everything is going to work out. Not every risk is going to work out. But every victory always comes on the tail end of taking a risk. A victory that's worthwhile, that is. Anything worth having in life is a risk. So it means not just having the courage to take the risk, but having the resourcefulness to see the risk through to the end. That's what it takes. Being resourceful, the single most important skill set of being an entrepreneur and being a leader. Outside of being curious, there is nothing more powerful, nothing stronger. As aviators, they taught us to adapt, overcome, and achieve, or adapt, improvise, and overcome, rather. And that's basically what you have to do as an entrepreneur and as a leader in business and in life. So with that, let's get out there. Let's take some risks, but let's get clear on that outcome that we want and think about the potential challenges, the potential things that could get in the way. Think creatively, think about those contingencies, and be prepared to take on that challenge from a place of resourcefulness, as well as a place of confidence and a place of, fuck yeah, let's go get some. All right, my friends, that's what I got for you this week. Remember, hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and be the first to know when I bring you new content. And remember, no matter what course you fly in life, fly high, fly fast, and fly far, stay driven.